Yom HaShishi Vaychulu HaShamayim V'ha'aretz V'chal Tzvah.
My Sabbaths you shall keep. It is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, to know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you. For more than 3,300 years, and nearly 172,000 seventh days of rest, the Shabbat has maintained the unique identity of the Jewish people. It is the sign given to the Jewish people that God has imbued them with part of His own sanctity. Sabbath observance is the Yesod HaEmunah, the very foundation of the faith of the Jew. Through it, the Jew gives testimony to his belief that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. Through Shabbos observance, the Jew is liberated from bondage to the mundane, physical world. It is the one ritual contained in the 10 Commandments. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Not only are we as Jews commanded to rest, but we are likewise commanded to allow our servants and even our beasts of burden to rest. The Sabbath-observant Jew even refrains from plucking a flower or a leaf on Shabbat. Through this one day and this one observance, all creatures in the world, whether man or animal or plant, receive a new status of dignity through the actions of the Jew. In the Babylonian Talmud, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai taught that if Israel observed 2 Sabbaths properly, they would be redeemed immediately. The Jerusalem Talmud states that the first Shabbat was observed properly when the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. Therefore, we need only observe 1 more Shabbat to bring the complete and eternal redemption. But what is proper Shabbat observance? For the answer, we must look into Sefer Shemot, the book of Exodus.
And Moses gathered all the congregation of the children of Israel, and said to them, These are the things that the Lord commanded you to do.
The verse refers to the construction of the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert, and the next verse continues, 6 days you shall work, and the 7th shall be for you a holy Sabbath, a day of rest unto the Lord. Whoever works on this day shall die. From these 2 verses, the sages of Israel derived that resting from work means refraining from the 39 creative activities done to build the tabernacle. These are the Melachot, the work activities.
The Melachot adhere to a single principle, not the principle of physical exertion, but the principle of man's mastery over his physical environment.
The exception is carrying from the private to the public domain, or the public to the private domain, or the distance of 4 cubits in the public domain. Carrying is the only one of the 39 Melachot, wherein a material object does not undergo change as a result of man's actions.
Taken together, these 39 activities are called Av Melachot, literally, fathers of work. They are plowing, sowing, reaping, gathering or binding sheaves, threshing, winnowing, selecting, grinding, sifting, kneading, baking, shearing, bleaching, combing raw material, dyeing, spinning, weaving processes, tying a knot, untying a knot, sewing, tearing, trapping, slaughtering, skinning, tanning, ruling lines, scraping hides, cutting to size or shape, writing, erasing, building, demolishing, final hammer blow, extinguishing fire, lighting a fire, carrying.
Besides the basic 39, there are the toldot, literally offspring. These are derivatives of the main activities. They can be similar in action but different in purpose, or similar in purpose but different in action. Grinding metal is a tolda of the av malacha of grinding grain. It is a similar action with a different purpose. Or with the av malacha of planting a seed in the ground. Pruning is an entirely different action, but the purpose is similar, to promote plant growth. Pruning is therefore forbidden as a tolda of seeding.
What we have is a system of 39 categories of work based on the unifying principles of action and purpose.
It is from these that we are commanded to rest as our observance of Shabbat. And through this rest, we attain true inner peace and spiritual freedom. With regard to the work that was done for the tabernacle, Exodus 35:33 states, La'asot b'chol malechet machshevet, meaning that everything must be done in a consciously thought-out manner. This means that 5 conditions must be present for an action to be an isur deoraita, forbidden by the Torah. Mitkaven. You have to want the malacha to occur as a result of your action. Kedarko. The work must be performed in the normal manner. If done in an unusual manner, it is not a scriptural prohibition, but it is forbidden rabbinically. Mitaken. The work must be productive. If done in a destructive manner, it is not a scriptural prohibition, but it may be forbidden by rabbinic law. Tzricha legufo. The action must be done for a need similar to its need in the building of the Mishkan. Mitkayam. The result of the work must have a degree of permanence. Writing with ink on paper is prohibited by the Torah. Writing in sand with one's finger is not prohibited by the Torah, but it is forbidden rabbinically. Also, in order for an action on Shabbat to be a scriptural prohibition, the complete act itself must be performed by one person.
Every Torah prohibition carries minimum amounts. To transgress the malacha of writing on Shabbat, one has to write 2 letters. If one writes 1 letter only, he has not violated the law scripturally, unless by writing the 1 letter he completes a word.
There is another important category called psik resha. We may not perform any action that will definitely result in a malacha, even if you don't intend for the malacha to result. Running through tall grass violates no malacha. But if by running you will unavoidably tear out grass, even if you don't intend to tear out the grass, it is forbidden. We can now define malacha on Shabbat as a conscious act, intentionally performed for a constructive purpose, which demonstrates mastery over the material world. There are 3 categories of Shabbat activities.
Mutter, activities which are permissible on Shabbat. Pater, this is an act that is not punishable according to Torah law, but is forbidden rabbinically.
Chayav, a forbidden act. The person is aware that it is Shabbat, and is aware that his action is a violation of the Torah, and he does it intentionally. This is called b'mezid, and he is liable for karet, spiritual death by the hand of heaven. In the days when the Sanhedrin court sat in Jerusalem, he was also liable for the death penalty by stoning.
If he performed the action unknowingly, it is called shogeg, inadvertent. In times when the temple stood, he would bring a sin offering. Today, the person attains forgiveness by expressing his regret to God and resolving not to repeat the act. The Torah empowered the sages to enact laws to ensure scriptural commandments are not violated. They are called isurei darabonan, rabbinic decrees, and are issued for several reasons. One is to prevent actions that might lead to Torah prohibitions. It is prohibited to write on the Shabbat. Therefore, the rabbis made lending money forbidden because it could lead people to write promissory notes. Another reason is to maintain the appearance and spirit of Shabbat by prohibiting mundane work such as measuring grain or weighing fruit. And yet a third is to protect onlookers from concluding that someone did a forbidden action. This is called maris ayin. These actions are of themselves permissible, but might give an observer the wrong impression. The rabbis forbid hanging out wet clothes to dry because an onlooker might conclude that the person laundered the clothing on Shabbat. The fourth category of rabbinic decrees prevent against moving certain objects such as those that serve no function for Shabbat. This category is called muksa. The purpose of this decree is also to preserve the sanctity of the Sabbath day.
The first malacha and the first step in the process of making bread is charisha, plowing. The purpose of plowing is to prepare the ground for sowing seeds, which would sprout and grow and ultimately be made into the 12 loaves which sat on the golden showbread table in the tabernacle. Any action done on Shabbat which improves soil for planting is forbidden by the Torah. Digging in soil, even if it is not for the purpose of sowing seeds, is forbidden rabbinically.
The general malacha of plowing includes digging up the ground to soften it, improving the quality of the soil by any means, even chemically, clearing obstacles in or on top of the ground, making grooves or furrows in the ground, making holes in the ground with a rod, and leveling surfaces of the ground. The malacha of plowing is transgressed by any of these activities performed in an area large enough to plant a single small seed.
Pouring water or other non-corrosive liquids on the ground to soften it is a tolda of plowing. Therefore, we may not wash hands over plants that are growing, or over soil in which plants are going to be planted, or in which weeds will grow. One may pull a lightweight object on the ground because it is uncertain whether it will dig furrows, and even if a furrow is dug, it is done without intent. But it is forbidden to drag a heavy object that will definitely dig furrows, even if the furrows are dug without conscious intent. This is an example of psik resha. We may not drag a heavy object over a paved area outside the house, if such an area is commonly unpaved, such as a backyard. But if the area is one that is always paved, then it is permissible.
Though it is forbidden to poke holes in the ground with a rod, it is permissible to walk over soft earth even with a cane or wearing heels that will dig holes in the ground. Since preparation of the soil for seeding includes leveling it, leveling the ground is forbidden as a tolda of plowing. This includes sweeping the ground with a broom. Any paved surface that is commonly not paved, such as a backyard, may not be swept. Areas that are usually paved may be swept. The sages have forbidden activities that would lead to leveling the ground. Therefore, it is forbidden to roll balls or marbles on the ground, which might lead one to level the earth to allow the ball to roll better. This includes kicking soccer balls and putting golf balls.
A stroller or a wheelchair may be pushed over the ground because they press down the earth, and the act of making furrows is only prohibited when the earth is removed. One may not scrape mud off one's shoes onto the ground. Instead, muddy shoes should be scraped on the edge of a step or on a curb or the like. The second malacha, as well as the second step in the process of making bread, is the malacha of zorea, sowing seed. The purpose of zorea is to cause plant growth.
Any form of planting on Shabbat is forbidden by the Torah. One may not plant seeds, bulbs, saplings, replant uprooted plants, or graft branches onto trees. If one scatters seeds or grain for feeding birds, it must not be more than they can consume in 2 days. If the grain has been moistened, only a half day's worth may be scattered, because moist grain can sprout in half a day. It is forbidden to water any kind of vegetation on Shabbat, and plants may not be fed any kind of solid or liquid plant food. A sprinkling system may not be turned on Shabbat, even if the plants will be damaged or lost. One may not tip a chair to cause collected rainwater to spill out onto the grass. People who eat in a garden on Shabbat should not wash their hands there nor drink liquids other than wine or liquor, which actually damage the growth of plants. Pruning a tree is a violation of sowing seed because it promotes plant growth. Removing rotting branches is similarly forbidden.
We may not kill plant-damaging insects on Shabbat. They may not be removed from the plant, nor sprayed with poison.
One may not shake off a tablecloth or scrape a plate which contains apple seeds, peach pits, or the like, because they may fall into the soil and sprout.
It is forbidden to cover a young plant or seedling to protect it from the hot sun or to protect it from frost damage. It is forbidden to raise or lower a flower pot with a hole in it, or to remove a pot with a hole in it from a plate or from within a larger pot and place it on the ground. And it is forbidden to take a flower pot with a hole in it outside the house. It is forbidden to sprout seeds on Shabbat, such as mung beans or alfalfa sprouts. We may not help the sprouting process in any way, such as changing the water, even if the seeds or beans are not actually in water, but merely in a moist environment. Once a plant is cut and removed from the ground or water, we are no longer considered able to cause it to grow. But it is rabbinically forbidden to place flowers in water, even if the water was prepared for the purpose before Shabbos started. This is because a closed or partially open flower will open further in the water and give the appearance of growth.
Closed or partially open flowers that fall out of a vase filled with water may not be replaced on Shabbat. If the flowers are completely opened and won't give the appearance of further growth, they may be returned to the vase.
The third malacha is the malacha of ketzira, reaping or harvesting. Detaching any plant or part of a plant from its source of growth on Shabbat violates the malacha of ketzira. The forms of this malacha include cutting down stalks of grain, picking fruit or flowers, digging up vegetables such as carrots or radishes, picking grasses or herbs, chopping down trees. Dried flowers or vegetation that remains attached to the ground may not be cut or picked. To be an isur midioraita, a scriptural prohibition, the harvesting must be done with a desire for the plant. Destructively picking or cutting a growing plant is prohibited rabbinically. Running through tall vegetation or dragging an object on grass so that some of the plant growth will be definitely cut is forbidden because of psik resha.
One may not remove dead flowers, leaves, stems, or branches from a plant that is growing in any type of flower pot. Since plucking leaves or fruit of a tree is harvesting from the Torah, one may not climb a tree or lean all one's weight against it. We may not hang something on an object that is attached to a tree, such as on a rope that is tied to a tree. If the rope is tied to a nail that's in the tree, it may be used.
A ladder or similar object that was leaning against a tree should be removed before Shabbat to guard against using it on Shabbat. If it was not removed before Shabbat, or if it was leaned there on Shabbat, it may not be removed until after Shabbat. A ball that landed in a bush or on a tree may not be removed on Shabbat. Though trees may not be used, they may be touched on Shabbat. But plants with easily broken stems, such as reeds and flowers, may not be touched on Shabbat. Grasses or other soft ground covering are exempt from these decrees. A person may run or lie down on grass or even handle it, but one should remember not to pluck a blade of grass on Shabbat. One may not smell the fragrance of fruit that is growing on Shabbat, because one might pick the fruit to eat it. This applies to fragrant edible plants such as mint or other spices. But we may smell flowers, even those growing on a tree, like orange or lemon blossoms. The Rabbanan felt that smelling a flower would not tempt someone to pick it, as with a piece of fruit. Fruit that fell from a tree by itself on Shabbat may not be eaten or touched until after Shabbat. We are concerned that the person will enjoy the fallen fruit enough to pick another one off the tree.
It is forbidden to ride a horse or a donkey or other animal on Shabbat because one may break off a twig to use as a riding crop. This prohibition involves using an animal in any way, and one may not use a wagon or carriage or anything else attached to the animal. If anything was placed on an animal before Shabbat or on Shabbat, it may not be removed, but a heavy load that is too great a burden for the animal may be removed. And it is permissible to do whatever is necessary to relieve an animal's discomfort if it does not involve a scriptural prohibition.
The fourth malacha in the process of making bread is ma'amer, gathering or binding sheaves. This malacha includes gathering fruit, vegetables, flowers, or other plants that were cut or picked or fell. The purpose of the malacha is to protect the crop from being damaged or lost. A principle of gathering is that it follows harvesting or reaping. Therefore, it is not a violation of gathering unless the activity is done where the plant actually grew. For example, if fruit or vegetables fell and were scattered in the house, they may be gathered, even for the purpose of protecting them. The exception is when the gathering or binding is done in an elaborate manner, such as stringing figs or pressing raisins or dates. This kind of binding is forbidden on Shabbat, no matter where it is done, even indoors.
The malacha of mamar is violated by simply gathering together 2 pieces of fruit, 2 flowers, 2 stalks of grain, 2 of anything from the plant world that has been harvested. It is scripturally forbidden to rake leaves to make a compost pile because one wants the items he is gathering. If leaves are raked to clean the area or to burn them without a desire for them, it is forbidden rabbinically. Making a bouquet of flowers is forbidden by the Torah if the binding is done in the place of growth.
The Rabbanan extended the malacha of gathering to include minerals taken from the ground, such as salt or coal or metal ore or gems. Gathering minerals after they've been mined is considered similar to gathering fruits after they've been harvested. Any method of gathering them together is forbidden, if done in the area where they were mined. Therefore, if salt has spilled indoors or at a picnic, it is permitted to gather it up. The fifth malacha is disha, threshing. The purpose of threshing is to remove a case or shell from around its inner substance, such as removing the chaff from a kernel of wheat. Or it may involve a liquid, such as the removal of juice from fruit by squeezing, or squeezing the liquid from a cloth.
Threshing was actually performed in several ways for the tabernacle. Wheat was threshed for making the showbread, and seeds were husked for making dyes for the curtains and the tent roof coverings. Grapes were squeezed for juice to make the wine offering, and olives were squeezed for oil to light the menorah. The malacha of threshing is transgressed only when the outer casing is considered waste matter. Removing beans from inedible bean pods is threshing and forbidden on Shabbat, but removing peas from edible pea pods is permissible.
Any act of threshing, using one's hands or a utensil designed for the purpose, is forbidden midioraita. If the action is done in an unusual manner, or with a utensil not designed for the purpose, it is an isur derabanan. It is permissible to peel fruit, shell nuts, or shell eggs on Shabbat, even though this is removing an inner substance from an unwanted shell. There are essential differences that make it permissible. For example, threshing is a beating process, and removing these shells is a peeling process. Squeezing fruit to drink its juice is forbidden on Shabbat. Squeezing grapes for juice or olives for oil are forbidden from the Torah. Other varieties of fruit are forbidden rabbinically. Fruit which is rarely or never squeezed for its juice, such as watermelons, may be squeezed for juice, unless it is the custom of the city not to squeeze any fruit. We may not squeeze a fruit into another liquid for drinking, such as lemon into tea. Most authorities permit squeezing fruit juice onto solid food, such as squeezing a lemon onto fish or salads or even into sugar, which can then be spooned into a cup of tea. You may not, however, squeeze lemon or orange or other fruit juices into a container, then pour the juice onto food. It can only be directly squeezed onto the food. Fruits and vegetables that have absorbed water, such as cucumbers or canned fruit, may not be squeezed to remove the water.
If cake and challah is dunked into wine or coffee or soup, it is forbidden to squeeze the liquid out to drink it. If a slice of lemon is floating in a glass of liquid such as tea or lemonade, it is forbidden to press it against the side of the glass or squeeze it in any way. Grapes and olives may not be squeezed for any reason, not onto solids, not even to get rid of the juice. It is permissible to suck the juice out of fruit like an orange that has been cut into quarters. When sucking out the juice of a fruit that is held in the hand, it is forbidden to squeeze the juice into the mouth. If necessary, it is permissible to squeeze fruit to give juice to a sick person on Shabbat, but it is not permissible with grapes unless needed for a life-threatening situation. Removing honey from a honeycomb on Shabbat is forbidden from the Torah as a tolda of threshing. The honey that is on top of the honeycomb may be used by scraping it off with a spoon or a knife, but honey which flows out of the honeycomb on Shabbat may not be used till after Shabbat. Squeezing liquid out of a piece of cloth because the liquid is wanted, such as for moistening dirt, is a violation of threshing. If the cloth is squeezed to get rid of the liquid so the cloth is more usable, it is a violation of laundering. Squeezing natural sponges or other materials and fibers that actually absorb liquid is an Isser D'Oraita of threshing. Squeezing synthetic sponges and similar objects which do not truly absorb liquid but trap it among the fibers is an Isser D'Rabbonim. Some brushes have bristles which are separated enough not to trap water, such as bottle brushes, fingernail brushes, even some toothbrushes. These may be used, but tightly clustered bristles may not be used. Steel wool and tightly woven nylon scouring pads may not be used on Shabbat because they will come to be squeezed. Loosely woven mesh pads where the water runs out as soon as the pad is lifted out of the water may be used. It is permissible to dry one's face or hands or body with a towel on Shabbat, even with a damp towel and even by pressing the towel against the skin, but a soaking wet towel may not be used. It is an Isser D'Rabbonin to squeeze out hair or dry it with a towel on Shabbat. Even though hair does not truly absorb water, it traps the water. Drying the beard is in the same category as drying hair and is forbidden.
We may not squeeze water or wine or any liquid that spills onto any garment or tablecloth, even by dabbing a cloth or napkin on it to absorb the liquid. If liquid spills onto a plastic tablecloth, paper napkins or paper towels may be used to absorb the liquid, but may not be squeezed out, nor even pressed down to soak up the liquid. It is forbidden to pour liquid medicines into cotton balls or gauze pads to daub the medicine onto the skin. The medicine should be poured onto the wound itself and then spread with one's fingers or with a plastic bag. The wound may then be covered with a gauze pad. If a baby is chafed, the same principle applies. The liquids or ointments should be applied by hand, not with a cotton ball or a gauze pad. And creams should be patted, not smeared, because of the malacha of smearing. It is permissible to squeeze any plastic bottle or tube, such as a ketchup bottle or a toothpaste tube.
Milking a cow or other animal is a tolda of threshing and is forbidden scripturally if the milk is retained for use. It is, of course, permissible to milk an animal to relieve the animal's discomfort as long as the milk is not used in any way.
It is permissible to breastfeed an infant on Shabbat, but expressing the milk into a vessel for the infant to drink is permissible only when the infant will not nurse. In matters pertaining to breastfeeding on Shabbat, as with all other questions of Jewish law, a rabbinic authority should be consulted. The sixth malacha is zoreh, winnowing. Winnowing is the act of tossing up the mixture of chaff and stalks and kernels of grain into the air, where the wind blows away the lighter weight chaff, while the denser grain falls to the ground.
Winnowing is accomplished through using natural wind. Nevertheless, using a fan or other wind-making machine for the purpose is forbidden from the Torah. Anything purified by wind is winnowing. Using wind to purify produce grown from the ground is winnowing from the Torah. Using wind to purify things that do not grow from the ground is winnowing from the Rabbanan. If peanuts are mixed up with peanut skins or pieces of peanut shells, it is forbidden to blow away the peanut skins and shells to keep the peanuts. We may not blow into a drink or a bowl of soup to remove an insect or a speck of dirt that is floating on the surface. This is a violation of the malacha of winnowing because the separation is caused by the use of wind. The insect may be blown to the side of the glass, then it can be spilled out with some of the liquid or lifted out with a spoon, so long as some of the liquid is taken with the insect, as will be explained later in Borer, the malacha of separation. Aerosol may be used on Shabbat. Aerosol air fresheners, aerosol perfumes may be sprayed on the body, but not onto clothing, and deodorant sprays may be used on Shabbat. There is disagreement concerning whipped cream or imitation whipped toppings from an aerosol can on Shabbat. One opinion permits them if the nozzle that creates a fluted design is removed before Shabbat. The nozzle cannot be removed on Shabbat. The other opinion forbids the use of aerosol whipped creams because of creating a new solid on Shabbat.
The seventh malacha, and the seventh step in the process of making bread, is borer, selecting. The principle of borer is an action which improves a mixture of objects by selecting and removing the unwanted ones. Therefore, it is forbidden on Shabbat to remove unwanted objects from a mixture, or to select and remove desired objects from a mixture and put them away for later use.
There are 3 requirements for selecting to be permissible on Shabbat. What is needed must be selected from what is not needed, taking the wanted item and leaving the unwanted item. The selection must be done by hand, and the item selected for use must be used soon after it is selected. This period of time is called somech lesuda, meaning close to the meal.
Somech leseuda is calculated as the time you took to prepare the food plus a half hour. If the food took 10 minutes to prepare, you have 40 minutes in which you should begin to eat it. If there is no preparation time, such as selecting peanuts from raisins, you have a half hour in which to eat it. The principle of somech lesuda applies whether you eat the food yourself, serve it to someone else, or even if you feed it to an animal. Borer applies to everything: food, toys, silverware, clothing, and books. If silverware is mixed together, we may not sort the spoons and the knives and the forks and put them away for later use.
With respect to borer, good and bad are relative terms. Both items can be good except that you want one and not the other. The one you want is food and the other is waste matter. If you have a mixture of peanuts and raisins and you only want peanuts, removing the raisins is forbidden. If nuts and shells are mixed together, you may not remove the shells. In a mixture of items where the desired ones are at the bottom, the mixture may be turned over to reveal the wanted ones. Dividing is not selecting. If there are 10 apples, 5 may be put away for later and 5 eaten now. Clothing may be a problem of borer. Clothing may not be selected and laid aside on Friday night to be worn the next morning. This is selecting good from bad and storing it away for later use. It may not even be done for children. It is forbidden to select silverware or dishes from a mixture and set the table Shabbos morning for later in the day. However, when drying silverware, after washing as each piece is handled, it can be placed in its proper place in the silverware tray. Since it is now separated, it may be used the next morning to set the table long before the meal. Fruit or vegetable peels, nut or eggshells may be removed and the food eaten even though the waste is being removed from the food, since this is the normal way of eating them. But we may not use an implement specifically designed for the job, such as a potato peeler. Foods may be peeled by hand or with a knife, since a knife is not specifically designed to separate bad from good. If the peel is inedible, it must be separated during the eating process or immediately before eating somech lesuda. If it is an edible peel, many permit separating it for later or even with a peeler, for it is considered part of the fruit, not a separate type. It is permissible to remove the seeds from cantaloupe or honeydew melon. It is considered the normal way of eating them, similar to peeling an orange.
Making egg salad must be done somech lesuda because of shelling the eggs. Vegetables or fruit for salads must also be peeled somech lesuda. Watermelon seeds and the melon's meat are in a true mixture of food and waste. The method of seed removal that is acceptable to all authorities is to take some watermelon in your mouth and then spit out the seeds. Others permit removal of watermelon seeds in the regular manner because it is during the process of eating. Some authorities permit removing bad from good during the eating process itself. That is, when the food is on the fork and just about to be eaten, but not on the plate. This includes removing a fish bone or a peach pit, but whenever possible, it is preferable to remove the good from the bad. For instance, it is preferable to remove the fish from the bone, holding the bone, while pulling away the meat. Bones may never be removed from fish before the meal unless some fish is removed with the bone. Rav Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, known as the Beis Halevi, taught that the custom of eating gefilte fish on Shabbat originated in order to avoid the whole problem of removing bones from fish. It is forbidden to pour liquid out of a pot, using the lid to hold back the solids. A fork may be used to remove meat from a bone because it is not a utensil of separation, but an extension of the hand. A spoon, however, can be both. When scooping out grapefruit sections, a spoon may be used, but it may not be used to separate fat from the top of a soup. If a pile of objects, such as socks or photos or letters, are sorted through, removing the top ones to reach the one that you want is a violation of borer. If the object you want is not obscured, but merely blocked by the upper ones, they may be removed.
With letters or photographs, the entire pile may be lifted and held together at one end, then flipped through till reaching the right one, which may be removed. 2 or 3 large items sitting together, such as a knife and 2 spoons, is not considered a true mixture and may be separated in any manner. If items are scattered over a wide area and each is distinct, it is not considered a true mixture and each may be selected at will. Books that are standing upright in a bookcase are not considered in a true mixture and any one may be selected even for use much later. However, pamphlets or small books without recognizable titles are a true mixture because the one you want is obscured within the group. Therefore, selecting one must be for immediate use. This can be done by reading a line or two, then setting it down for later. If books are piled on the table and some are hidden, clearing the table in a random manner is permitted, but they must be placed in random empty spaces on the bookshelf, or as each one is picked up, learn a line or two from it and then put it in its rightful place. It is permissible to separate black from white chess pieces in a mixture for an immediate game, but when the game is over, it is forbidden to separate the pieces into color groupings to put away, and it's the same with the pieces of all games.
The 8th malacha is techina, grinding. The essence of this malacha is the act of breaking down objects into tiny pieces. The Av malacha, performed for the need of the tabernacle, was grinding grain for flour, as well as crushing seeds for making dyes. There are 4 basic forms of tochen. Grinding. This includes grinding herbs for food, or medicine, or dyes, crushing earth, filing metal, sanding, or grinding wood. Chopping. This includes chopping raw meat or nuts, mincing onions or garlic, shredding or grating vegetables or fruits. Mashing. This includes softening or liquefying soft foods like avocados or bananas, cooked potatoes or cooked carrots, cooked rice and kasha. Slicing. This includes slicing vegetables or fruit very thinly, whittling or planing wood. Making a thin slice, even the full length of something, is a violation of grinding. Grinding is forbidden on Shabbat whether the action is done with a specialized utensil like a grater or a non-specialized utensil such as a fork, or even if done by hand. A knife may be used to cut up foods into small pieces if it is somech lesuda, but they should be cut in pieces slightly larger than normal. Only a knife may be used because a knife is the only cutting tool normally used during a meal.
The permission to cut or chop food into small pieces just before or during a meal applies only to food. Nothing else may be cut or chopped even for immediate use on Shabbat. In fact, the main reason we are forbidden to take medicine on Shabbat is because of the melacha of grinding. Of course, if a person is ill, it is permissible to take the required medicine. The Torah defines ill as feeling bad enough to have to lie down. Crushing or grinding for a child is permissible with an unusual utensil, such as the handle of a fork or knife. Mashing or liquefying foods for a child is also permissible if done in an unusual manner. Crushing and mashing in an unusual manner means with a knife or fork handle or with the bottom of a spoon, but not with a fork because it is commonly used for mashing. Avocado and bananas should not be spread since this automatically crushes them into a paste, but they may be spread in an unusual manner for a child. It is permissible to chop and mash foods which do not grow from the ground, so long as one does not use a utensil specifically designed for the purpose. One may thus chop or mash boiled eggs or cooked meat or fish with the tines of a fork, but not with a potato masher.
Once something has already been chopped or ground up, there can be no further violation of the malacha of grinding. This is a principle called ein tochen achar tochen, There is no grinding after grinding. Therefore, it is permissible to regrind food that was originally ground up. Grinding bread or toast or matzah, or crushing a cube of sugar or a block of salt are all permissible on Shabbos. And cooked potato that was cut into small pieces before Shabbat may even be mashed on Shabbat. However, to crush a crystal of salt or rock crystal candy is not permissible, because when the substance is liquefied, then solidified, it may not be crushed or ground on Shabbat. Even though dried mud, when removed, will crumble, its removal is permitted from skin areas because of the discomfort. But dried mud that is stuck to clothing or shoes may not be removed. The ninth malacha, Melachot, sifting. The Av malacha of sifting for the tabernacle was the act of putting ground flour through a sieve or a strainer to remove impurities like bran and pieces of improperly ground grain. Inasmuch as sifting separates wanted from unwanted objects in a mixture, it closely resembles borer, selecting. The resemblance is so close that some activities we have classified as sifting may be found elsewhere as selecting.
There are three basic types of sifting. The first is simply sifting.
Sifting includes sifting sugar, cocoa powder, or cereals. If the action is done with a sieve or similar instrument, it is a violation of Melachot, sifting. If the impurities are removed by hand, it is a violation of borer, selecting.
The second category is straining, such as removing water from cooked rice or noodles through a colander. This may be done by draining the food in a sieve or removing the food from the water using a strainer, a slotted spoon, or a spoon with holes. Removing a tea bag from hot water and holding the tea bag above the cup while the tea drains out is using the tea bag as a strainer, and it is a violation of sifting. Those who permit using a tea bag on Shabbat insist that the tea bag remain in the cup while drinking, or removing it with one sweeping motion so that the tea in the bag does not drain back into the cup. The third category is filtering. This includes filtering wine or juice to remove skins, seeds, or filtering brackish water to get rid of sediment. It is an isur d'oraita to sift matzah meal or breadcrumbs to remove large pieces. Removing them by hand is borer, selecting. It is permissible, however, to remove the pieces by hand and eat them as they are removed. Lumpy salt or sugar may not be sifted. The lumps may be crushed, but not by pressing them against the mesh of a sieve. It is permissible to sift powdered sugar through a sifter merely to distribute it evenly over a cake. This is not truly sifting. Putting uncooked rice in a shaker to keep the salt from caking is forbidden because the salt shaker acts as a sifter, allowing the salt to pour while keeping the rice in the shaker. It is forbidden from the Torah to filter a beverage that is filled with impurities that the average person would not drink as it is. Water that is pure enough for the average person may be filtered, but a finicky person who would not drink it may not filter it. Permanent water filters are permissible to use on Shabbat because normal tap water is drinkable without them, and the particles in tap water are not considered to be a true mixture with the water.
The 10th malacha is lisha, kneading. Kneading consists of working fine solid particles together with liquids to make a solid mass. So long as the solid particles retain their identity in the mixture, such as eggs mixed with mayonnaise in a normal egg salad, it is not kneading. But if the egg were kneaded to the point where the pieces were no longer recognizable, it is kneading. It is kneading whether liquids like water and juices are used, or thicker substances such as mayonnaise or honey. Making a thick, doughy mixture in the normal way on Shabbat is kneading as prohibited by the Torah. Making a thinner mixture, such as a cake batter or pudding, is kneading as prohibited by the Rabbanan. The definition of a thin mixture is one that will pour. Making liquid mixtures, such as instant coffee or cocoa, is not kneading at all, and is permissible, assuming no other melachot are involved. If the items being worked with are both liquids or pasty, such as honey or yogurt, it is permissible to mix them together. The malacha of kneading must have one dry substance, such as with flour and water. There are 3 deviations from normal kneading that, if done, will always protect against transgressing the malacha. First is to reverse the order of mixing the ingredients. If the solid is normally put in first, put the liquid in first. The second deviation is to mix the ingredients in an unusual manner. One should use a finger or hand, or at least use unusual strokes with the spoon, such as back and forth strokes. The third deviation from the norm is to make the mixture thin enough so that it is not in the category of a kneaded mixture.
If a thick mixture is needed for a sick person or a baby on Shabbat, it is permissible to make it, but one should change the order of putting the ingredients in the bowl and the manner of mixing. If a thick mixture was made before Shabbat and more powdery ingredients were added and worked in on Shabbat, it is kneading from the Torah. If the mixture was moderately thin, it is kneading from the Rabbanan. It is permissible to add sugar or salt to either liquids or loose mixtures because they melt on contact with liquids. Mixing garlic powder or onion into margarine or butter is kneading from the Torah. Making a frosting by mixing powdered sugar into margarine is kneading. Mixing salt into chopped liver paste is working particles into a thick mass, but it may be done in an unusual manner. Of course, salt may be sprinkled on top and eaten that way. Besides egg salad, people make deviled eggs. It's aptly named because many people transgress kneading from the Torah in making it. Unlike egg salad, where the pieces of egg retain their identity in the mayonnaise, the yolks of deviled eggs are worked into a paste with mayonnaise and spices. Both the order of the ingredients and the method of mixing must be changed. Denture powders that are sprinkled on the dentures and become a thick adhesive from the moisture of the mouth is a violation of kneading. Only prepared adhesives may be used.
The 11th malacha, and the final step in the process of making bread, is the malacha of bishul, cooking. There are 2 basic forms of bishul, cooking and baking. Cooking means cooking in a liquid, even the slightest amount. Afia, baking, refers to cooking without liquid, such as baking bread. The sages established a minimum heat at which cooking will occur. It is called yad soledet bo, the temperature which will scald an infant's tender skin. Authorities agree that 165 degrees Fahrenheit, or 71 degrees centigrade, is definitely yad soledet bo, though some set the minimum temperature lower, as low as 115 degrees, or 46 degrees centigrade. Yad soledet bo is also the established temperature at which water cooks. This temperature is below the boiling point, although some maintain that it is the boiling point.
Food that is completing its cooking on Shabbat may not have the cooking process hastened once Shabbat has begun. There are 6 actions to avoid. Closing an oven door, even if merely opening the door to check. Taking the pot off the stove, then returning it to the stove. Moving the pot to a better position over the fire. Placing a lid on an uncovered pot, even if the lid were merely removed to check inside. Removing some food or liquid from the pot. Stirring partially cooked food, solid or liquid. Even if the pot is taken off the stove, it may not be stirred if the contents are still hot and not fully cooked. Stirring water is permissible even if it has not yet boiled because stirring does not hasten the boiling process.
Once food is fully cooked, it may be moved from one hot spot on the blech to a hotter spot over the flame. A primary cooking vessel, or pouring from a primary cooking vessel onto food, will cook any raw food or unboiled liquid. Hot water from a primary vessel may be poured onto a cooked liquid which has cooled off but is still warm. Cooked liquids that have completely cooled off may not have hot water from a primary vessel poured on them. Hot liquids from a primary vessel may be poured onto a cold cooked solid food that is dry. But hot water from a primary vessel may not be poured on pre-cooked powders, such as instant coffee, instant tea, instant cocoa, soup powders, sugar, or salt. A secondary vessel cooks all raw foods except water, olive oil, ginger, cinnamon, and raw beef, which are considered hard to cook. Therefore, hot water poured from the pot into a cup may not have a slice of lemon put in the water.
If soup or cholent are poured directly into a bowl, one may not put onion, garlic, paprika, or pepper into it. Baked food may not be put into a hot secondary vessel. Challah may not be dunked into a bowl of hot soup, nor may cake be dunked into a cup of hot coffee in a secondary vessel. Cooked liquids that have completely cooled down may be put into a secondary vessel, such as putting pasteurized milk into a cup of hot coffee.
To make instant coffee, tea, or cocoa, or instant soup, the cup must be dried. Then the hot water from the kettle may be poured into it. Once the hot water is in the cup, one may add the instant coffee or other pre-cooked powder and the sugar and the pasteurized milk. Many people are strict about making instant coffee or instant tea only in a third vessel. A third vessel and pouring from a secondary vessel do not have the power to cook. The exception is with foods which are very easily cooked, such as raw eggs, salt herring, raw sardines, and most authorities say tea leaves as well. Hot water from a teacup may be poured onto a slice of lemon. Authorities disagree as to whether a soup ladle becomes a secondary vessel or not. In any case, however, when ladling soup out of a primary vessel into a soup bowl, we may put baked foods such as challah or matzah into the bowl.
Solid, fully cooked dry food cannot be further cooked even if completely cold. Such food may be put in a hot primary vessel that is off the fire and will not be returned. Such food may be placed on the lid of a pot on the stove on Shabbat, even if they will become hotter than Yad Soledet Bo. A liquid or wet food may not be put into a primary vessel even off the fire, and liquid from a primary vessel may not be poured onto it because cold cooked liquids will recook. A plate of cold soup may not be poured back into the soup pot even off the fire, but it may be put into a hot secondary vessel such as a soup tureen full of hot soup. Liquids that have cooled off but are still warm may be poured back into a primary vessel off the fire.
Many authorities state that baked foods will cook further in liquid. Therefore, challah or matzah or roast chicken may not be put into hot soup in a primary vessel off the fire, or in a hot bowl of soup that was poured directly from the pot. Nor may cake be dunked into a cup of hot coffee that is a secondary vessel. The reverse, that food bakes after it has been cooked in liquid, is also true, providing the baking changes the character of the food. A piece of boiled chicken may not be taken out of the soup and roasted in the oven. We may cook food Erev Shabbat, then permit the food to continue cooking into the Shabbat. But the sages were concerned that people might hasten the cooking process, which would result in a transgression of the Malacha of Bishul. Therefore, they decreed that the fire had to be covered, and a modern stove must be covered by a sheet of metal, which has become known as the blech. Nothing off the blech may be put into a pot on the blech on Shabbat. However, food that is in one pot on the blech may be transferred to another pot on the blech. If a cholent is too dry, water may be poured into it from a kettle on the blech. A pot may be taken off the blech and returned if three conditions are fulfilled. The food in the pot must be fully cooked. The pot should be taken off the stove with the intention of returning it, or at least without the specific intention of not returning it. And while the pot is off the stove, it must be held.
A crock pot for use on Shabbat must have an independent inner sleeve that can't be completely removed from the heating element. And the heating element must be covered with aluminum foil as if it were a flame on a stove.
It is forbidden to turn on a radiator on Shabbat that is a part of the central hot water heating system. This would be the equivalent of pouring cold water into a primary vessel and cooking it. The hot water knob in the sink may not be turned on Shabbat because, as the hot water leaves the boiler, cold water rushes in and is heated to a cooking level.